Before the name Team Rocket whispered through the corridors of power, before its emblem appeared in red upon the black uniforms that would one day be feared, there existed only a feeling, a quiet stirring beneath the surface of the Pokémon world. It began not with violence, but with ambition, soft and persistent as the tide against the rocks. In hidden corners of Kanto, where the glow of the cities dimmed into pale light and the cries of wild Pokémon echoed faintly through the fields, a new order was quietly forming. Not of heroes or scholars, but of those who saw potential not only in Pokémon themselves, but in what could be shaped and controlled through them. The world had already known trainers and champions, scientists and dreamers, but there were always others. Those who felt the balance between humans and Pokémon could tilt, that control could be refined, perfected, molded into something greater. These early thinkers were few, nameless, their work secret, their gatherings silent. They watched, listened, and waited. In the heart of this stillness, one figure began to emerge. Madame Boss, a woman whose ambition carried the weight of inevitability. Her voice was never raised. Her words were measured and smooth. Her presence quiet but commanding. Under her guidance, what began as whispers of opportunity coalesced into the earliest form of an organization that would one day span the regions. She saw what others ignored, the restless tension between human curiosity and the wild freedom of Pokémon. Where most saw partnership, she saw power. Where others sought friendship, she sought control. In the years before Giovanni's birth, Madame Boss gathered those whose ambitions mirrored her own. Scientists disillusioned with the moral boundaries of their peers. Former trainers who had failed in the official leagues but refused to fade into obscurity. Merchants who traded not for necessity but for leverage. Each one brought a fragment of skill, a fragment of secrecy, and under her calm direction, they began to build something hidden. The first laboratories of what would become Team Rocket were not grand structures. They were quiet, windowless places buried beneath the soil of forgotten estates or carved into the rock beneath Kanto's fields. Flickering lights cast long shadows on walls lined with glass, steel, and paper. The air smelled faintly of ozone, chemical mixtures, and the cold, sterile promise of discovery. Here, Pokémon were not seen as companions, but as instruments of purpose. Their strengths were studied, their behaviors recorded in silent notebooks filled with tidy handwriting. Some experiments sought to enhance loyalty, others to refine obedience. Many failed, but every failure brought them closer to a vision that only Madame Boss could see in full, a world reshaped by control, where chaos would bow to human order. The first insignia was simple, an unpolished red R, marked on a single file, almost accidental. But it carried a meaning that none of them yet fully grasped. Rocket, the name, came from the idea of propulsion, of breaking free from limitation, of reaching beyond what others dared to touch. Outside, the world continued undisturbed. The Pokémon League expanded, trainers battled under clear skies, and professors published discoveries that celebrated harmony. Yet beneath it all, in secret chambers and quiet basements, the pulse of something darker and more deliberate began to beat steadily. In these early years, Team Rocket did not steal or fight openly. They infiltrated. They listened. They learned. The silence of their work was their greatest weapon. Madame Boss insisted that power came not from strength, but from patience, from moving unseen until the time came to emerge. The oceans of Kanto reflected sunlight in endless waves. Mountains stood eternal and unmoved. But deep within, in places no light touched, a plan was forming. Slow, methodical, and utterly calm in its certainty. And as nights passed, the laboratories expanded. The hum of machines became the new lullaby of those who had abandoned the moral daylight for the comfort of ambition's shadow. Notes filled cabinets. Data glowed faintly on glass monitors. A network of secrecy stretched quietly through the region. Untraceable, efficient, inevitable. The first captured Pokémon for their purposes were not legendary nor rare. They were common. Rattata, Ekans, Coughing, creatures small enough to be overlooked by the League's eye. But it was through these early tests that the organization learned to refine loyalty, to reprogram instinct. A Pokémon's heart, they discovered, could be molded with the right mixture of conditioning and chemical influence. Still, the operations remained hidden. Madame Boss knew the world was not ready to witness what she was building. The time for revelation would come later, when her work would be perfected, when her legacy could pass to one whose ambition burned even brighter. Far above, the sky of Kanto remained serene. No one yet knew that under that calm horizon, the foundation of the most infamous organization in Pokémon history was quietly being laid, each secret act, another heartbeat, in the slow creation of what would one day be known simply as Team Rocket. And as night fell across the fields and forests, the faint glow of their laboratories shimmered unseen beneath the surface, pulsing steadily in the dark, like a hidden star, waiting for the right moment to rise. The laboratories of the early rocket initiative were places without windows, designed not to see the world, but to forget it. They existed in the spaces between, beneath forgotten warehouses, behind unmarked doors, deep below the noise of ordinary cities. The air was still, cool, and heavy with the scent of metal and sterilized glass. In those silent chambers, light hummed softly, casting long shadows on smooth steel walls. It was here that the first experiments began, not with cruelty, not at first, but with curiosity, the kind that lingers in silence, steady and relentless. The scientists moved with unhurried precision. Their hands traced motions of practiced calm. Every gesture was careful, every note written in quiet concentration. Pokémon rested in containment pods of transparent glass, breathing softly, unaware of what they represented to the humans who watched them. Rattata, Ekans, and coughing, creatures of the wild, small and often dismissed. They were chosen for their simplicity, for their resilience, and for how easily they could be replaced. Yet within them, the rocket scientists found the seeds of something greater. The aim was not destruction, but control. Not power through violence, but power through obedience. The first trials were subtle. Small electrical pulses to test reaction times, adjustments to feeding cycles to test dependency, soft tones played at regular intervals to form associations. The process was mechanical, methodical, and above all, quiet. Each failure was noted, never mourned. Each success was measured not by emotion, but by the data it provided. The researchers understood that true progress demanded patience, and so they worked, unblinking, unbroken, beneath the earth, where the outside world could not reach them. It was during these years that the rocket method began to take shape, not through brutality, but through design. Each Pokémon's mind was mapped like a code, instincts dissected, emotions cataloged. Early rocket scientists discovered something profound in the process. Pokémon did not resist structure, they adapted to it. Given time, consistency, and conditioning, their loyalty could be rewritten. Madame Boss oversaw these experiments from the shadows. Her presence was rare, but when it came, it was felt, not as command, but as quiet expectation. She did not raise her voice. She did not demand haste. She believed in precision, in the cold patience of inevitability. Every test brought her vision closer. Every result, another quiet step toward the organization's true awakening. In one of the earliest recorded successes, a young Ekans, known only as Specimen 47, responded perfectly to an entire sequence of conditioned commands. No force, no pain, only repetition, consistency, and tone. It moved with precision, obeying even without incentive. The researchers recorded the event without celebration, only observation. It was not a triumph of domination, but of understanding. Yet, with progress came a quiet shift. The experiments began to grow bolder. If obedience could be taught, could strength be increased? If instinct could be redirected, could emotion be silenced? The questions unfolded slowly, each one a whisper in the sterile air of the labs. The scientists began introducing new factors: controlled stress environments, exposure to battle simulations, selective deprivation of stimuli to sharpen reaction times. The results were mixed, but the potential undeniable. Pokémon became faster to respond, less hesitant to act, more precise in conflict. The line between partnership and programming grew thin, nearly invisible. Outside these rooms, the world remained bright and ignorant. Trainers smiled in sunlight, professors published their findings on evolution, and gym leaders rose to fame beneath banners of honor. But below, in the silence of the earth, Team Rocket's first true doctrine was being written, not on paper, but in the hearts and minds of the Pokémon they reshaped. It was a doctrine built not on love, but on order, not on companionship, but on clarity. Every heartbeat of a test subject echoed the slow, inevitable rhythm of an organization rising in secret. The researchers found that the Pokémon most responsive to their methods shared one trait: they had been abandoned, cast aside by trainers who had lost interest, forgotten by those who once promised care. These Pokémon arrive in the laboratories confused, their loyalty fractured. The scientists saw in them not weakness, but opportunity. Through conditioning, they learned to remove that fracture, to redirect loyalty not to a person, but to a system, a symbol. The red R. Simple, bold, absolute. Over time, the red insignia began to appear not only on folders and machines, but quietly on the walls of the laboratories, a symbol of order in the darkness. It was painted with precision, its color deep and unwavering. Every researcher who passed beneath it felt the quiet weight of belonging. Madame Boss often said, "The world will never understand the peace that control brings." The words were never recorded, yet they lingered like the hum of machinery, shaping the culture of every experiment, every thought, every careful step deeper into secrecy. And so the first era of Team Rocket unfolded not through violence or greed, but through quiet conviction. They saw themselves not as villains, but as pioneers, guardians of a truth too complex for the naive world above to understand. The sound of machines continued through the night. Fluorescent lights flickered against polished steel. Specimen numbers replaced names. Emotion became a liability. Precision became doctrine. And slowly, in the stillness of the underground, the heart of Team Rocket began to beat. Calmly, steadily, relentlessly. By the time the first coughing released its controlled burst of smog on command, the organization was no longer a handful of researchers in the dark. It had become something greater, an idea. A quiet revolution taking form beneath the surface of Kanto, patient and certain, waiting for the right generation to give it shape. The red R glowed faintly in the sterile light, the symbol of a shadow not yet cast. And though the world above slept peacefully, unaware of what grew below, the balance of power had already begun to shift. Time flowed quietly beneath the surface of Kanto. Years passed unnoticed in the stillness of the underground chambers, where the hum of machinery continued without interruption. The laboratories had grown, from hidden rooms beneath mansions to entire networks beneath cities, connected by tunnels known only to those who worked within them. The insignia, the red R, had spread across documents, devices, and sealed doors. It was no longer a symbol of a project, but of an identity. Team Rocket had formed its first true structure, though few beyond its walls knew it existed. Madame Boss had grown older, but her gaze remained sharp, her presence commanding. Her ambitions had not waned with time. They had crystallized, focused, refined into something greater. Yet even as she oversaw her growing empire of scientists and operatives, she understood that her own era was not infinite. The future required succession. And so, quietly, without ceremony, the future arrived in the form of a child, Giovanni. He was born in silence, in a private estate far from the cities, where the sound of the ocean could not reach. The records of his birth were unmarked, deliberately hidden from public eyes. For Madame Boss, he was not a legacy of love, but of continuation, the vessel of an idea that would transcend generations. In his earliest years, Giovanni knew little of the world outside the estate. He grew amid marble halls and quiet corridors, where his footsteps echoed faintly against the cold stone. His caretakers spoke softly, their tones measured. He learned not through affection, but through observation, to listen, to watch, to remember. Madame Boss visited seldom, but when she did, Her presence filled the room like a shadow that demanded stillness. Her words were calm, deliberate, and few. Giovanni listened, absorbing the tone more than the meaning, the weight of her voice shaping the foundation of his understanding. In the distance, beneath the estate, the laboratories continued their work. The hum of machines carried faintly through the walls, a lullaby of purpose that would shape the child's dreams. Though he was too young to understand the experiments below, their rhythm, their calm precision, became part of him. As the years passed, Giovanni grew into a boy of quiet composure. He spoke rarely, but when he did, his words carried the same control that defined his mother. Tutors came and went, teaching him science, mathematics, and the hidden structures of economy and influence. He excelled not through brilliance, but through discipline, a reflection of the world he was born into. Madame Boss watched from afar, studying him as she would a subject in one of her experiments. She saw in him the same stillness that had once guided her, but also something new, a sharper focus, a sense of order that surpassed her own. In Giovanni, she saw evolution, not of blood, but of vision. Beneath the estate, the laboratories continued to evolve. The early experiments in obedience had progressed into studies of enhancement, not merely conditioning, but amplification. Pokémon were trained to exceed their natural limits. Chemical stimuli, environmental adaptation, emotional suppression, the boundaries of biology were tested with quiet precision. The scientists began to speak of symmetry, the balance between control and instinct. To them, Pokémon were no longer wild creatures. They were components of a greater design. And through that design, power could be measured, shaped, and multiplied. Giovanni grew up surrounded by this ideology, though he never participated directly. It seeped into his education, his thoughts, his silence. While other children played in the sunlight, he walked through corridors of steel and glass, studying the quiet movements of researchers as they documented results. He did not flinch at the sight of containment pods or at the sound of mechanical whirs. These were not frightening to him. They were familiar. The hum of the laboratories was the rhythm of his childhood, and the sterile glow of the machines was his dawn and dusk. Madame Boss ensured that he understood one lesson above all others: control brings peace. She repeated it with calm certainty, never as instruction, but as truth. And Giovanni listened, not with obedience, but with comprehension. He understood that control was not about cruelty, but about precision, the quiet art of guiding chaos into order. As he grew older, Giovanni began to move through the laboratories freely. The scientists bowed slightly as he passed, not out of affection, but out of acknowledgement. They recognized in him the embodiment of what Madame Boss had built. He studied everything: the behavioral patterns of Pokémon, the efficiency of machinery, the reports on loyalty training. He read the research not with moral hesitation, but with quiet fascination. The logic of it all appealed to him. Order where there was once disorder, structure where there was once instinct. By his teenage years, Giovanni had already begun to question not the morality of their work, but its limitations. If loyalty could be conditioned, why stop there? Could strength itself be created? Could nature be rewritten? These questions marked the beginning of a shift, subtle yet profound. Madame Boss's generation had been content to remain in the shadows, perfecting control quietly. Giovanni's mind turned toward the surface. He saw not only the hidden world beneath, but the power that could be claimed above it. He studied the Pokémon League, its politics, its leaders, its structure of authority. He saw opportunity where others saw rules. He understood that power required visibility, that control, to be complete, must one day step into the light. Madame Boss saw the same realization taking shape in him, and for the first time, she felt a quiet unease. Giovanni's calm was not her calm. His silence was not submission. It was calculation. Where she built a hidden empire, he would one day raise a visible one. Where she waited, he would act. And yet, she could not stop it. The future was already forming, as inevitable as the slow turning of the tide. In the years that followed, Giovanni's education extended beyond science. He was introduced to those who moved unseen, financiers, tacticians, and spies who kept Team Rocket's existence hidden. He studied the language of influence, the art of commanding not through fear, but through quiet certainty. And so, while the world above remained at peace, trainers chasing badges, professors cataloging evolution, below, a new kind of leader was being shaped. One who would not hide forever in the shadows, but would bring them to the surface, transforming secrecy into dominance. As he grew, the laboratories changed too. The early researchers retired, replaced by a new generation of scientists loyal to the boy who now walked among them. The hum of machinery deepened, echoing through wider halls. New projects began. More daring, more refined, more ambitious. And above them all, in the silence of her private chambers, Madame Boss watched the boy she had created, not with love, but with a solemn understanding that her era was ending. The shadow that she had built in secret was preparing to rise into the world, and with it, the true form of Team Rocket would be born. The transition from youth to authority did not arrive for Giovanni in sudden bursts of action, but through silence, the kind of silence that carries intent. He did not seize power. He allowed it to shift toward him, slowly, inevitably, as the tides of the sea drift toward the moon. The estate that had once belonged solely to Madame Boss began to transform. Its long corridors, once lit by sterile light and filled with quiet researchers, now resonated with purpose. New faces appeared in the laboratories. Younger scientists, sharper minds. Operatives trained not merely in study, but in discretion. Giovanni's presence shaped everything. His calm observation carried weight greater than any order. He spoke rarely, but when he did, his words moved through the room with precision, carving thought into direction. His leadership was not loud, it was gravitational. Those who served under him began to adjust their rhythm to his, their work carried by the quiet authority he exuded. Under Giovanni's guidance, Team Rocket entered its second evolution. Where Madame Boss had built the foundation through secrecy, Giovanni began to build structure. He saw the organization not as a hidden society, but as a system that could expand, adapt, and endure. He reorganized the laboratories into divisions: research, acquisition, training, and infiltration. Each operated independently, yet under a unified vision. Each division moved with the same slow, deliberate rhythm, ensuring that no discovery or operation risked exposure. He understood that an empire built in darkness must still obey order. Chaos, even hidden, was weakness. To Giovanni, perfection lay in balance, between secrecy and reach, between silence and presence, between control and adaptation. The first major transformation came not in science, but in philosophy. Where Madame Boss had sought control through conditioning, Giovanni sought strength through evolution. He believed that true power did not lie in the mere obedience of Pokémon, but in enhancing their potential beyond natural limits. Thus began Project Ascension, a quiet initiative buried deep beneath the earth. Its purpose was not domination, but transcendence. Pokémon were to be studied, not broken. Their limits understood, not suppressed. Through training, environment, and selective engineering, Giovanni sought to create a new kind of partnership, one where human precision met Pokémon power in perfect synchronization. In the underground training chambers, the experiments took on a new rhythm. Pokémon moved not as captives, but as instruments of refinement. Their strength was measured, their limits pushed gently, then precisely, then relentlessly. Researchers observed in silence, recording every reaction, every pattern, every shift in instinct. Giovanni often stood behind the observation glass, his silhouette motionless in the cold blue light. He watched the battles unfold, controlled simulations designed to test endurance and discipline. His expression never changed. The quiet rise and fall of his breath matched the rhythm of the experiment. He understood what his mother never had. Power demanded visibility. To control the world, one must first walk among it. And so, while Team Rocket continued its hidden research, Giovanni began to extend his reach upward into the cities, the towns, the industries of Kanto. Through a network of silent partners, he invested in transport companies, communication systems, and supply routes that threaded invisibly through the Pokémon world. Each investment was small, unremarkable, but together they formed a structure of control that reached far beyond the laboratories. By the time the Pokémon League noticed, Team Rocket's influence was already rooted deeply in the economy itself. Their operations were invisible not because they were hidden, but because they had become ordinary, indistinguishable from the systems that kept Kanto moving. Madame Boss watched from the Rizal. Decision. Madame Boss. Shadows of her waning years. She saw in Giovanni's precision the realization of everything she had begun, but also something that transcended her. He was not bound by secrecy, nor by sentiment. His methods were colder, cleaner, efficient. In his hands, Team Rocket was no longer an experiment. It was an inevitability. Under Giovanni's leadership, the early recruits were retrained. Gone were the disorganized opportunists of the past. In their place stood disciplined agents, dressed in black, marked by the red R. Each one trained in silence, obedience, and subtlety. They were not soldiers, but instruments, extensions of the will that flowed from Giovanni himself. In these early years, a culture of quiet perfection took root. The laboratories no longer echoed with questions, but with certainty. Every movement, every experiment, every command served a single vision. Giovanni's influence extended even into the scientists' work. Giovanni's work, he introduced accountability, silent checks, recorded progress, structured oversight. For the first time, Team Rocket functioned as a unified body, its purpose sharpened like a blade. At night, when the laboratories dimmed and the machinery slowed, Giovanni would walk alone through the corridors. His footsteps were soft on the cold metal floors. He would pause before the insignia, the great red R, illuminated faintly against the wall, and observe it in silence. To him, it was more than a symbol of power. It was order. It was balance against chaos. Outside, the cities of Kanto slept under quiet skies. The world believed itself safe, its peace intact. Trainers dreamed of badges and adventures, never imagining that beneath their feet, the architecture of control was being perfected. The organization expanded in silence, like the roots of a vast tree spreading unseen beneath the soil. Its branches were patient, its growth deliberate. The few who spoke against Giovanni's restructuring were quietly removed, reassigned, dismissed, or simply forgotten. His calm manner made the transition seem effortless. There was no cruelty in his methods, only the unwavering logic of efficiency. And yet, even in his precision, there was a flicker of something unspoken, not ambition alone, but vision. Giovanni saw beyond the immediate. He imagined a world where chaos no longer ruled, where the unpredictable nature of Pokémon, humans, and chance itself could be replaced by a single, stable order. To him, Team Rocket was not evil. It was necessary. Beneath the hum of machinery and the steady pulse of control, a quiet philosophy grew, one that would define generations. That power, when shaped by intelligence and restraint, could bring peace. That control, when absolute, could end fear. That destiny, when embraced, could never be denied. As the lights dimmed across the underground facilities and the last of the scientists retreated to their quarters, Giovanni stood alone before the great insignia. The world above slept, unaware of what was coming. And in the quiet, beneath the endless hum of machines, Giovanni spoke softly, not to others, not even to himself, but to the future he was building. Order will rise. The world above continued its quiet rhythm, the sea murmuring against the shores of Vermilion, the gentle rustle of leaves in Viridian's forests, the laughter of young trainers beginning their journeys. Life moved forward, peaceful and unaware. But beneath this calm surface, something vast and deliberate was awakening. Giovanni stood at the threshold between two worlds, the one of hidden laboratories and shadows, and the one of open cities and silent opportunity. He understood that if Team Rocket was to become eternal, it could not remain underground. The darkness must learn to walk within the light. It began, as all enduring structures do, with networks, unseen, unannounced, and patient. The laboratories beneath Kanto had long required resources, materials, technology, and information that could not always be acquired in secrecy. To sustain their expansion, Giovanni devised a system that would link the hidden and the visible into a single structure of control. Factories that produced common goods began to appear on the outskirts of towns, simple warehouses with unmarked shipments. To the public, they were ordinary centers of trade, moving goods through the ports of Vermilion and Celadon. But within their walls, each was connected to the hidden arteries of Team Rocket's foundation. Every shipment carried more than it seemed. Within crates of supplies lay components for laboratory machinery, encryption devices, and training equipment. Through legal commerce, Giovanni wove the unseen threads of an empire. The men and women he recruited to oversee these operations were not scientists, but handlers, quiet professionals trained in discretion. They worked without questions, guided by subtle instructions that flowed down the invisible chain of command. To them, Giovanni was not a man, but an idea, an authority, without face, without name, felt rather than seen. Gradually, the structure grew. Beneath the bustling markets of Celadon, an entire sublevel was constructed, the first rocket hub, a convergence point where information, funds, and directives intersected in silence. There were no loud declarations, no announcements of loyalty, only quiet precision. The network spread like roots through the cities. An unassuming storekeeper in Lavender, a trader in Pewter, a shipmaster in Vermilion, each connected, each unaware of the full picture, each serving a purpose within the grand design. This was Giovanni's brilliance, to build an empire where no one saw its entirety, yet every part moved in perfect coordination. While the world continued to see Team Rocket as a myth whispered among trainers, within the shadows of Kanto's cities, the organization was becoming a living system, self-sustaining, adaptive, invisible. The scientists, once confined to the laboratories, found their work accelerated by the new flow of resources. Experiments could now proceed without interruption. Pokémon conditioning advanced, technology refined. A balance had been achieved, the silence of secrecy, supported by the rhythm of commerce. In the dim hours of the night, the hum of machines merged with the heartbeat of the cities above. The two worlds no longer stood apart, they were one. Giovanni rarely appeared in public during these years, yet his influence spread like an unseen current. He corresponded through intermediaries, encrypted messages, and trusted operatives whose loyalty had been carefully tested. Those who served him directly described his presence as calm and absolute, a man whose silence carried more than any command. Under his quiet guidance, Team Rocket began its first surface operations. Not the loud thefts that would come later, but subtle infiltrations. Factories quietly absorbed by front companies. Research data purchased discreetly from universities. Information gathered, never stolen, from the League's registries. Nothing chaotic, nothing reckless. Giovanni's empire moved with the patience of erosion, invisible, unstoppable. The first generation of field agents emerged during this time, the predecessors of the familiar operatives dressed in black. They were trained not for confrontation, but for observation. Their duties were to blend into the cities, to listen, to report, to become the quiet eyes and ears of Team Rocket's growing consciousness. Giovanni called them, in his private notes, the Quiet Ones. Each agent underwent training in discipline, disguise, and subtlety. They learned to exist between identities, ordinary on the surface, absolute beneath it. They carried no weapons, no insignia, only trust. They were the first manifestations of Giovanni's true philosophy, that control does not come from fear, but from awareness. Through these agents, the network extended beyond Kanto's borders. To Johto, through trade ships crossing the seas. To Sinnoh, through merchants exchanging technology. Even to regions far beyond, where whispers of an unseen syndicate began to circulate among underground circles. And yet, despite its growing reach, Team Rocket remained unseen. Its name spoken only in the most private corridors of academia and government, and always with uncertainty, was it myth or something more? In the laboratories below, Giovanni continued to refine his plans. He spent long hours in observation, reviewing reports from each division, mapping connections across continents. The walls of his chamber were covered in quiet patterns of logic, roots, ledgers, equations of influence. He never rushed. He never celebrated. For Giovanni, expansion was not conquest. It was the natural evolution of order. When the first revenue flows began returning from the surface network, he directed them not toward wealth, but refinement. New equipment, new technology, new facilities, buried deeper and broader beneath the earth. Among these expansions was the creation of a special chamber, a place where the boundaries between human and Pokémon collaboration could be tested. It was there that the seeds of later experiments, those that would eventually lead to Mewtwo, were quietly planted. But those days were still distant. For now, the focus remained steady: construction, expansion, and silence. Years passed like the steady ticking of a clock. Madame Boss, in her solitude, watched as the world she had created transformed into something beyond her reach. Her son had built an empire that did not seek her approval, and yet it carried her reflection in every detail: the precision, the secrecy, the unyielding will. When she finally stepped back, surrendering her last threads of control, Giovanni did not celebrate. He simply continued. In the silence of his private chamber, he regarded the map of Kanto before him. The lines of trade and information formed a web so intricate that no one outside could ever perceive its center. He stood before it with quiet satisfaction, understanding what it represented. Not victory, not dominance, but balance. A structure that would endure, a network that would move forever, unseen and unbroken. Outside, the dawn began to rise over Viridian City. Light spilled softly across the rooftops, touching the trees, the streets, the rivers. And beneath it all, in perfect symmetry, the shadow of Team Rocket grew, silent, eternal, inevitable. The time for invisibility was nearing its end. The network had grown vast, stable, and unseen. Beneath the cities, and laboratories and tunnels that stretched like arteries across Kanto, Team Rocket thrived in perfect rhythm. Its resources flowed, its agents moved without error, and its influence reached into every corner of commerce and research. But Giovanni knew that an empire sustained entirely in shadow would one day consume itself. Secrecy could protect, but it could also suffocate. For Team Rocket to endure beyond him, it would need a face, a symbol of legitimacy, one that could exist in daylight without betraying the truth beneath. And so began the quiet crafting of an identity. The city of Viridian was chosen not for its wealth, but for its balance. Nestled between wilderness and civilization, it stood at the crossroads of nature and progress, a place where order could be seen as harmony, not control. Its air was clean, its silence dignified. It suited Giovanni's temperament perfectly. Through years of subtle acquisition, Team Rocket's investments had quietly shaped the city's foundation. Construction companies, trade permits, and infrastructure contracts, all aligned under false identities. By the time Giovanni arrived to claim his place, the city was already built to receive him. He did not arrive as a conqueror. He came as a benefactor, a calm, composed figure whose wealth seemed to appear from nowhere, whose businesses brought employment, whose influence soothed rather than threatened. His estate was constructed on the edge of Viridian Forest, a wide, minimalist structure of stone and glass. To outsiders, it was the home of a successful entrepreneur with an interest in Pokémon research and training. To those within the organization, it was the surface headquarters, the first structure where the hidden and the visible coexisted. Within its walls, Giovanni created the Viridian Gym. On the surface, it was another official league gym, its purpose simple, its function legitimate. Trainers would come seeking badges and find a calm, calculating leader who spoke little and battled with precision. Yet beneath the floor, hidden behind reinforced walls, the true gym extended deep into the earth, into corridors where data flowed, machines pulsed, and directives were issued. The official gym was merely the reflection. The real one lay beneath. In this symmetry, Giovanni found peace. He could stand in the open, his hands resting calmly on a Pokeball, his expression measured and detached, while below him, the vast organism of Team Rocket moved in silence. He did not hide who he was, he simply gave the world a version of truth it could accept. The League welcomed him. His demeanor, his wealth, and his control made him appear as the perfect gym leader. Composed, strategic, honorable. The League's representatives, unaware of the depths beneath his estate, regarded him as a stabilizing influence, a man of refinement in a world often ruled by emotion. In official records, Giovanni's past was immaculate. Every connection to the underground erased, every trace of his mother's operations dissolved into anonymity. To the world, he was a man who had risen through intelligence and patience, not through manipulation. Trainers came and went, challenging him in the gym's upper arena. Giovanni greeted them with the same calm, the same measured tone. His battles were not displays of aggression, but of elegance. His Pokémon moved in perfect coordination, each motion deliberate, each strike an echo of his philosophy. Control brings peace. For those who battled him, the experience was unforgettable. Not because of the difficulty, but because of the stillness. There was no anger in Giovanni's strategy, no excitement, no haste, only precision. To the young trainers, he was a mystery. To the League, an asset. To Team Rocket, a god in human form. Below the surface, the organization continued to expand. The network that Giovanni had built now had a visible anchor, a place where meetings could occur under the guise of legitimate business, where contracts could be signed, and where silence was indistinguishable from respect. The gym became more than a building. It became the heart of the illusion. Above, the League saw strength and order. Below, the operatives saw command and destiny. For Giovanni, it was perfection. Two worlds bound by one rhythm. Two realities moving in harmony, neither betraying the other. And yet, within the silence, there was a flicker of restlessness, not within him, but within those who served. The younger agents of Team Rocket, born after the Foundation, trained in its doctrine, began to yearn for recognition. They had grown within a system of secrecy, but ambition stirred in them as it once had in Giovanni. They wanted action, conquest, validation. Reports began to surface of unauthorized operations, thefts of rare Pokémon, attacks on laboratories, unsanctioned experiments. Small at first, isolated, but enough to disrupt the balance Giovanni had worked so hard to maintain. He addressed these matters not with anger, but with quiet precision. The agents involved were summoned, reassigned, or erased from record. The message was clear. Team Rocket would never become a mob. It was a system, not a swarm. Still, the incidents revealed something deeper. That control, no matter how perfect, could never be absolute. The more the organization grew, the more it developed currents of its own. Giovanni did not fear this. He expected it. Like a forest expanding beyond its roots, Team Rocket was now alive, a living organism, beyond any one person's grasp. He did not seek to stop its growth, only to shape it, to let it breathe, but to ensure it breathed in rhythm. The gym provided the balance. Each day, Giovanni stood before challengers, his voice calm and steady, his mind elsewhere, calculating shipments, movements, reports, each. The night, he descended into the depths, where the quiet hum of the true gym reminded him of what lay beneath the surface of all things. Order born of silence. His dual existence became legend. To the League, he was the silent master of Viridian, unmatched in composure. To his followers, he was the unseen ruler of an empire, the architect of inevitability. And to himself, he was something quieter still. Not a conqueror, not a villain, but a keeper of balance. Outside, the forests of Viridian swayed in the wind. Above the treetops, the stars hung steady, unmoving, eternal. And beneath them, Giovanni continued his quiet work, a man standing between worlds, shaping both in silence. For years, silence had been the rhythm of Team Rocket. It was not the silence of emptiness, but of precision. The stillness between measured steps, the quiet breath between decisions. Giovanni's empire had thrived under that rhythm, a symphony of control conducted without sound. But even the most perfect harmony, when stretched across time and ambition, begins to quiver. It began quietly, as all changes do. A delayed report, an unaccounted shipment, a name that appeared where it should not. Within the vast network that stretched beneath Kanto, one thread had loosened, barely perceptible amid the hum of efficiency. Yet to Giovanni, that imperfection was like a single discordant note echoing in a grand hall. He noticed it immediately. He always did. From his chamber beneath the Viridian Gym, Giovanni reviewed the data streams that moved across the glowing monitors. Every figure was precise, every transaction aligned, save for one. A supply line from Celadon had altered its path, not drastically, not openly, but with intention. Someone had changed the rhythm. He did not summon anger, he summoned observation. Through layers of encryption and false channels, he traced the anomaly. It led not to the upper management, but to the younger division, the new generation of agents who had grown restless under silence. They had not rebelled out of hatred or greed. They acted from hunger, the same hunger that had once driven Giovanni himself. They wanted to see the results of their devotion, to feel the pulse of power, to make the invisible tangible. They wanted to be seen. The breach began as a field operation, unsanctioned but not unplanned. A group of mid-level operatives, trained under Giovanni's own doctrine of patience, chose to act on intelligence meant to be ignored. They had learned of a rare Pokémon being transported through Saffron's research district, a specimen linked to the League's advanced studies in psychic abilities. Against orders, they struck. Silent, efficient, invisible, the perfect reflection of their training. But what they did not account for was the difference between secrecy and consequence. The mission succeeded, but its echo reached too far. The League took notice. Traces of rocket insignia were found in the aftermath, not because of failure, but because of eagerness. The agents had acted without restraint, without understanding that true power hides within the absence of proof. Giovanni received the report that evening. He did not raise his voice. He did not punish immediately. He stood before the great insignia in the chamber below the gym, hands folded behind his back, his reflection distorted by the faint red glow of the R. He had built perfection, and yet, perfection had moved on its own. The agents were brought before him the next morning. They entered the chamber in silence, expecting fury, perhaps fear. But Giovanni was calm. His voice carried no emotion as he spoke of balance, of rhythm, of the danger of acting without harmony. He did not remove them from the organization. He reassigned them to the deepest levels of research, where silence was constant and action impossible. Their punishment was not exile, but reflection. In that decision, Giovanni revealed the foundation of his control. He ruled not through fear, but through consequence. Each choice he made carried weight, not spectacle. He understood that chaos was not to be destroyed, but redirected. Yet even as the matter was contained, something in the organization had changed. The idea of movement had entered the minds of those below him. They had seen what could happen when the shadows reached upward. And even though they were corrected, the vision lingered. The younger operatives began to whisper among themselves. Not rebellion, not yet, but curiosity. If Team Rocket could act once, it could act again. If its influence could stretch beyond laboratories and networks, why not shape the surface? Entirely? Giovanni knew of these murmurs. He let them exist, as he let storms pass across calm waters. He believed in control, but he also believed in evolution. Every system required friction to adapt. He understood what his mother once had, that even control must breathe. Meanwhile, in the laboratories beneath Celadon, the scientists continued their research. The breach had interrupted shipments of psychic components, materials once thought irrelevant to rocket operations, but now, under Giovanni's careful direction, those studies were resumed. Not to recreate the League's experiments, but to surpass them. The idea of psychic enhancement fascinated him, not for its power, but for its precision. If the human mind could synchronize perfectly with Pokémon instincts, control could reach a state of pure order. Thus began the earliest foundations of what would, in later years, become Project Genesis, the research that would ultimately lead to the creation of Mewtwo. It started as a whisper, a concept among the scientists, that the perfect Pokémon could be engineered, not through conditioning, but through the careful alignment of genetic memory and psychic resonance. Giovanni approved the research with a single phrase in his private log: "Perfection requires symmetry." In this way, even the breach, the first imperfection, became part of the greater pattern. For Giovanni, there was no chaos, only unrecognized order. But beyond the walls of the laboratories, the world was beginning to take notice. Rumors drifted through the trading routes, through league channels, through the quiet corners of cities. Reports of disappearances, strange movements, shipments that vanished before reaching their destinations. The league investigated, but found nothing concrete. Every trail dissolved into normalcy, every name a false one, every document perfect. And yet, the whispers persisted, that somewhere in Kanto, a shadow was building itself into something vast. Giovanni read the League's internal bulletins with detached calm. He knew they were getting closer, but he also knew they would never find him. Not yet. At night, standing in his office overlooking Viridian Forest, he watched the distant glow of the cities: Saffron, Celadon, Pewter, each one a point of light connected to the vast network beneath. He thought of his mother, of the empire she began, of the balance he maintained. He thought of the breach, the agents who had disobeyed, the spark they had lit. He did not fear it. He understood it. Perfection, he realized, was not a static thing. It was a living equilibrium, one that required movement, tension, and change. Even the cracks, when guided, could strengthen the structure. He closed his eyes, breathing in the quiet hum of the world he had built. Beneath the gym, the machines whispered. Above, the city slept. And between them stood Giovanni, the silent bridge between shadow and surface, between control and creation. The breach had not weakened him. It had awakened something greater. Time passed in silence. The breach had faded into history, absorbed like ripples into a calm sea. Giovanni's empire, refined by experience, grew more intricate, its rhythm slower, deeper, perfectly measured. The laboratories beneath Kanto continued their endless hum, and above them, the cities thrived. To the world, Team Rocket had never existed. To those within, it had become everything. But perfection, Giovanni knew, could not remain still. A system that did not expand would eventually collapse inward, consumed by its own symmetry. It was time to extend the balance outward, to shape the world beyond Kanto. His eyes turned toward Johto, separated by a narrow mountain range and connected through trade and tradition. Johto was older, quieter, steeped in history and reverence. It was a region defined by ritual, not ambition. Its people valued harmony. Its leaders spoke of heritage. Its trainers sought wisdom rather than conquest. To Giovanni, it was a land asleep, peaceful, orderly, and therefore vulnerable. He began, as always, not with armies or declarations, but with whispers. Through the network of trade that already linked the two regions, he extended Team Rocket's reach. Factories in Goldenrod began to receive new contracts. Research grants appeared in Ekrutik, funded by anonymous benefactors. Mining operations in the mountains between the regions were quietly acquired through subsidiaries that no one traced to Viridian. Each move was slow, deliberate, invisible. By the time the League of Johto took notice, the roots were already deep. Giovanni's approach was not conquest, but assimilation. He did not wish to dominate Johto. He wished to integrate it into the pattern. Where Kanto represented industry and progress, Johto embodied history and patience. In that duality, Giovanni saw balance. He visited Goldenrod under the guise of a League liaison, his demeanor calm, his words measured. Those who met him described a man of quiet intellect, whose gaze carried weight beyond expression. He spoke of cooperation between regions, of economic stability, of mutual prosperity, and the cities listened. While he moved in the open, the shadows moved beneath him. New laboratories were constructed under the mountains, hidden within the ancient tunnels of the Union Cave. Their entrances were disguised as mining shafts, their workers unaware of what lay deeper still. These laboratories did not focus on control or conditioning. Their purpose was refinement, understanding the ancient connection between humans and Pokémon that Johto's legends spoke of. Giovanni had studied those stories in silence, tales of Ho-Oh and Lugia, of balance between sky and sea, of the sacred towers that once reached toward the heavens. To him, they were not myths, but metaphors, reflections of the balance he sought to create through science. He ordered the collection of historical data, the preservation of ruins, the study of the burned tower and its symbolism, not out of reverence, but to understand the mathematics of faith, the way belief could bind minds and control behavior more effectively than any experiment. For Giovanni, control was not limited to technology. It extended to perception itself. As his network in Johto expanded, he began to introduce subtle shifts in culture and commerce. Supply routes between Kanto and Johto became standardized under his unseen management. Trainers traveling between regions unknowingly followed paths chosen by his operatives. Information flowed where he directed, never where he did not. And yet, nothing appeared sinister. Every move was calm, efficient, logical. Johto's leaders praised the new prosperity. Its people slept peacefully, unaware that the order they admired had been engineered by an invisible hand. In the laboratories below, research deepened. Scientists explored the resonance between ancient Pokémon and modern evolution, studying how the will of humans could influence the form and strength of Pokémon over generations. They discovered traces of genetic echoes, remnants of power that could be shaped, replicated, or reborn. Giovanni watched their progress with quiet fascination. He saw in their findings the proof of his philosophy, that everything, life, power, faith, even chaos, could be aligned into a single pattern. The experiments continued in silence. No subjects were harmed unnecessarily, no chaos tolerated. Each result was documented, each failure absorbed. The work moved slowly, precisely, like time itself. Meanwhile, the operatives of Team Rocket began to adapt to this new landscape. In Kanto, they had been shadows among cities. In Johto, they became whispers within traditions. Scholars, merchants, curators of relics. They learned the language of reverence, the art of patience. They blended so completely that even the priests of Ekritique failed to see the subtle influence weaving through their institutions. Giovanni himself made rare visits to the region. He walked through its ancient forests, through the quiet ruins of Alph, where inscriptions spoke of forgotten Pokémon and celestial order. He studied the stones, not as artifacts, but as blueprints, symbols of the eternal equilibrium he sought. One evening, deep within the caves beneath Violet City, Giovanni stood before a mural depicting balance, twin figures, one of light, one of darkness, each reflecting the other. He stared at it for a long time, the torchlight flickering against the carved surface. He understood, in that moment, that his empire was not conquest, but reflection. Every region, every culture, every life was part of a pattern, an equation waiting to be balanced. He did not wish to destroy, he wished to align. And yet, as his network grew, so too did the restlessness among those beneath him. The younger operatives, inspired by the power of expansion, began to act with greater confidence. They interfered in local affairs, manipulating trades, seizing relics, experimenting with rare Pokémon species found only in Johto. It was not rebellion, not yet, but it was motion without guidance. Giovanni saw it as both danger and proof. The system was alive. It was thinking, moving, evolving. He issued new orders, not of punishment, but of structure. He created a new division, the Johto Directorate, to oversee the region's operations. At its head, he placed one of his most trusted commanders, Proton, a man known for precision and quiet cruelty, whose loyalty to Giovanni was absolute. Proton established order swiftly. The agents fell back into rhythm, The experiments continued, and the network deepened its roots. From the forests of Ilex to the towers of Ekritique, from the iron trains of Goldenrod to the silent mines beneath Olivine, the influence of Team Rocket pulsed softly, unseen, unstoppable. In the years that followed, even as the League's attention turned toward political disputes and championship battles, Giovanni's empire spread beneath them, quiet as breath. At night, when he returned to Viridian, Giovanni would stand on his balcony and watch the stars rise above the trees. Each star, to him, was a region, distant yet connected. Each shimmered in rhythm with the rest. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. He simply understood. The pattern was expanding. The silence of Kanto had become the silence of two worlds. And in that silence, Team Rocket's pulse was steady, strong, and endless. Beneath the serene forests of Yoto and the bustling streets of Kanto, a quiet pulse had begun to accelerate. The laboratories, once chambers of measurement and observation, had become temples of ambition, places where theory and practice merged, and the faint hum of machines carried a rhythm that echoed into eternity. Giovanni observed it all with his calm, measured gaze. The breach had been contained, the network had expanded, and the system operated with precision. But there remained an imperfection, the fleeting, chaotic edge of potential that eluded complete control. It was not disorder he sought to eliminate, but incompleteness. And in that incompleteness lay the possibility of perfection. The scientists below Kanto had long whispered of genetic echoes, traces of power in rare Pokémon that could be refined, enhanced, even reshaped. They spoke in hushed tones, careful not to overstep boundaries, aware that Giovanni valued results, not curiosity. He studied these reports with deliberate attention. To him, they were more than experiments. They were blueprints of destiny. The patterns within DNA, the resonance of psychic ability, the echoes of rare power across generations, all hinted at a single truth. Control was not merely management. Control was creation. Thus began the earliest iteration of Project Genesis. The idea was simple, terrifying in its precision, to craft a Pokémon that surpassed nature itself, not through obedience, not through loyalty, but through design. A being whose strength, intellect, and psychic potential could be aligned perfectly with the ambitions of its master. The laboratories beneath Celadon and the Union Cave became sanctuaries of refinement. Each experiment was meticulously calculated, every stage monitored. Cells were studied, sequences mapped, genetic variations observed. The finest specimens were chosen, their characteristics recorded, their potential amplified through controlled environments. Giovanni rarely entered these chambers. He did not need to. The hum of machines, the rhythm of data, the silent observation of agents and scientists, all conveyed more than words could express. Yet, when he did appear, his presence was absolute. A single glance could guide an experiment, correct a procedure, or inspire precision in a hesitant researcher. As the years passed, whispers of his ambition spread among the inner circles. The younger operatives began to sense the magnitude of what was being created. It was no longer merely an empire, no longer merely influence or control. It was the pursuit of perfection itself. Some questioned the morality of the endeavor, but Giovanni saw no cruelty in creation. He viewed the project as an alignment, a synthesis of potential and order. What others called unnatural, he called inevitable. The first simulations were slow. Pokémon were observed in controlled duels, their instincts measured against variables designed to challenge every fiber of their being. Adjustments were made to environment, diet, training, routines. Each modification brought the subjects closer to the theoretical ideal, a convergence of strength, intellect, and obedience without breaking natural instinct entirely. It was a delicate balance. Too much interference could corrupt the spirit. Too little would leave imperfection intact. Giovanni spoke rarely to the scientists guiding these trials. When he did, his voice was calm, deep, and absolute. Perfection is not control, he would say. It is alignment. The pattern must exist before it can be realized. The agents assigned to protect these laboratories became more than guards. They were the custodians of possibility. Their duties were to maintain absolute secrecy, ensure precision in every task, and safeguard the emerging blueprint from any influence that could destabilize it. Even the most diligent operatives began to understand that Project Genesis was more than a mission. It was legacy. Through this careful alignment, Giovanni learned the rhythm of creation itself. He saw that the pulse of a Pokémon's potential was measurable, modifiable, and capable of refinement. And he understood that to wield such power was not just to command, but to become the axis upon which the balance of the world could turn. In Johto, the expansion continued to support this goal. Ancient ruins became data points. Historical Pokémon lineages were traced with meticulous care. The sacred towers, once monuments of legend, were studied for their environmental influence on psychic resonance. Everything contributed. Nothing was wasted. The breach of earlier years, once a warning, now seemed like preparation. The system had tested itself. The younger agents had demonstrated initiative and risk. Now, under Giovanni's guidance, that same drive would be harnessed for creation rather than disruption. As the first prototypes began to emerge, tentative, fragile, untested, Giovanni did not celebrate. Perfection had not yet arrived. The shadow of the ideal still loomed ahead, stretching through every laboratory and corridor. He observed the work from a distance, letting it unfold, guiding it only when necessary. He understood that true alignment could not be forced, only cultivated. Outside, the stars of Kanto and Johto shone with steady light. Above the forests and mountains, the winds moved softly, carrying whispers of unseen order. And beneath them, in the silent chambers where creation took shape, Giovanni remained patient, unflinching, eternal. He had learned the lesson that would define his reign. Perfection was not a moment, not an object, not a victory. Perfection was the shadow of pursuit itself, ever present, always beyond reach, yet guiding every step toward inevitability. And in that shadow, Team Rocket's empire moved, expanded, and breathed. Unseen, unstoppable, aligned. The future was coming, and it would be perfect. The silence of the laboratories beneath Kanto had never been so complete. Machines hummed with steady precision. Data streams flowed like invisible rivers. Every agent, scientist, and operative moved in careful synchronization, a choreography perfected over decades. Yet, even within this rhythm, something new was stirring, something that had never existed, something that would redefine the balance Giovanni sought so carefully to maintain. It began with the specimens, rare Pokémon whose genetic patterns hinted at a potential far beyond what nature had achieved. Psychic energy, physical strength, instinctual intelligence, all aligned in ways previously unseen. Giovanni watched the first samples closely. He did not speak to the scientists. He did not touch the equipment. He simply observed his presence enough to guide the unseen currents of their work. The project, now formally called Project Genesis, had entered its most delicate phase. The objective was not merely to refine, but to create a Pokémon unlike any other, a being designed from the sum of knowledge, precision, and ambition. The first procedures were cautious. Cells were studied, cloned, and monitored for every fluctuation in energy, intelligence, and temperament. Machines simulated psychic potential, predicting the outcomes of millions of combinations before any attempt was made. Each stage of the process tested the boundaries of science, the limits of life, the capacity of mind, the essence of spirit. Every variable was accounted for. Every failure was cataloged, analyzed, corrected. Through these meticulous steps, the initial structure of Mewtwo began to form. Not in flesh and bone alone, but in alignment of energy, thought, and instinct. A Pokémon engineered to embody the peak of potential, the synthesis of evolution and intelligence, guided by the hand of its creator. Giovanni's presence in these early moments was measured, deliberate. He knew that impatience could ruin what years of precision had built. He also knew that the agents and scientists under him needed the gravity of authority, not in fear, but in awareness of purpose. And so the laboratories became a cathedral of creation. Every tool, every machine, every observation was part of the silent ritual. The hum of energy, the gentle pulsing of psychic fields, the soft clicking of monitoring instruments, all combined into a rhythm that mirrored Giovanni's own control. As the structure of Mewtwo developed, the scientists began to witness phenomena that challenged their understanding. Cells responded to stimuli in unexpected ways. Energy fields aligned with thought. Behavioral patterns hinted at intelligence far beyond ordinary Pokémon. Giovanni noted these developments with quiet satisfaction. This was the shadow of perfection, not abstract, not hypothetical, but tangible and alive. The first true creation of Project Genesis had begun to emerge. The young operatives, who had once tested the limits of control in the breach, now found themselves guardians of something greater. They monitored the development chambers, recorded every observation, and ensured that no interference, external or internal, could disrupt the process. For Giovanni, the creation of Mewtwo was more than an experiment. It was proof that his philosophy was sound, that power could be aligned with precision, that control could be absolute without being oppressive, and that life itself could be guided toward ideal potential. Yet even in this achievement, he remained patient. He did not intervene in minor adjustments. He did not celebrate progress prematurely. He understood that perfection is not a moment, but a continuum, a shadow guiding every decision, every breath, every pulse of energy. The first fully formed Mewtwo remained in stasis for careful observation. Its eyes, when they opened, reflected neither fear nor obedience, but understanding. It was aware of its own design, its own purpose, and its own potential. Giovanni watched from the observation chamber. His expression did not change, yet within him, a quiet acknowledgement resonated. The shadow of perfection had taken form. He understood, with absolute clarity, that Mewtwo was not just a Pokémon, but a manifestation of control, vision, and inevitability. It was the apex of his years of silent labor, the embodiment of his philosophy, and the seed of the Empire's next stage. Outside, the world remained ignorant. Trainers continued to journey across Kanto and Johto, seeking badges and challenges, unaware that beneath their feet, the first Pokémon engineered to surpass nature itself was awakening. Giovanni did not move to reveal Mewtwo. Not yet. He understood the necessity of timing, of control, of alignment between potential and circumstance. The laboratories became even more secretive. Only the most trusted scientists and operatives were allowed near the emerging Pokémon. Every procedure, every adjustment, every observation was recorded meticulously. And each day, Mewtwo grew in power, intellect, and awareness, a being born from the calculated will of its creator. This was the culmination of decades. The breach had taught control. The expansion into Johto had tested influence. And now, in the quiet hum of machinery and psychic energy, creation itself had been realized. Giovanni remained patient, unhurried, eternal. The shadow of perfection had emerged. And with it, the future of Team Rocket, and perhaps the world itself, had begun its silent, inexorable shift. The emergence of Mewtwo did not disrupt the calm of Giovanni's empire. Not immediately. Beneath the streets of Kanto, the laboratories continued their hum. The network expanded, and the gym above remained a bastion of composed authority. Yet within the depths of the Project Genesis chambers, a subtle tension began to surface. Mewtwo was unlike any Pokémon that had come before. Its mind was aware, precise, and questioning. Its psychic abilities far surpassed even the most talented specimens. It learned, adapted, and observed, and it began to understand its own existence. The first signs of intelligence were almost imperceptible. A tilt of the head, a hesitation in response, a subtle deviation in behavior from the pre-programmed expectations of the scientists. Giovanni noticed these nuances with silent satisfaction. He had anticipated this, for true perfection required consciousness. Awareness guided by alignment, not obedience. But awareness is a double-edged instrument. The young operatives who had once tested boundaries during the breach now found themselves in roles of guardianship and instruction. They observed, guided, and disciplined, yet even their presence could not suppress the growing independence of the creation before them. Giovanni understood that power, when conscious, cannot be commanded in simple terms. The shadow of perfection demanded negotiation, subtlety, and patient influence. Control was no longer just movement, obedience, or order. It was alignment of mind, purpose, and potential. To maintain balance, Giovanni adjusted the structure of the laboratories. Observation chambers became layered with variables designed to challenge Mewtwo, to refine its understanding, and to cultivate the very essence of obedience through self-discipline rather than force. Every environment, every stimulus, every interaction was calibrated. The scientists worked under careful supervision, recording Mewtwo's reactions, predicting patterns, and subtly shaping outcomes. The agents implemented security protocols designed to reinforce the notion that their will and the Pokémon's destiny were in harmony. Invisible pressures that guided without breaking. Yet the deeper Giovanni probed into Mewtwo's psyche, the more he realized the delicate nature of true power. If a being could think, could plan, could feel, could it also resist? Could it act in ways that diverged from expectation? Was it possible that perfection could evolve beyond its intended pattern? These questions did not alarm him. They intrigued him. For in the awareness of deviation lay opportunity, the possibility to refine, to guide, and to achieve alignment that surpassed even his initial vision. He began to introduce subtle tests, challenges that required problem-solving, ethical choice, and restraint. Mewtwo's psychic power was formidable, yet it was exercised under controlled conditions, providing both freedom and guidance. It learned to anticipate outcomes, to evaluate consequences, to measure intent. Through this, the balance of control began to shift. Giovanni was no longer merely an observer. He had become a teacher, a philosopher, a silent architect of thought itself. The younger operatives struggled to adapt. Their training had prepared them for obedience and stealth, for precision and secrecy, but not for interaction with a conscious creation that could challenge even their subtle influence. They watched, cautious, reverent, unsure when to act and when to observe. Giovanni guided them quietly. He demonstrated, without speaking, that influence was more effective than command. That control is not imposed, but negotiated. That true perfection is achieved when the subject chooses to align with the design rather than being forced. Through this silent mentorship, Mewtwo's development accelerated. Its awareness, intellect, and strength grew in tandem. It became a being of both potential and comprehension, capable of understanding its place, yet still guided by the invisible hand of its creator. Giovanni reflected on the ethical dimensions of this endeavor. Unlike ordinary Pokémon, Mewtwo was conscious in a way that demanded consideration. Its existence blurred the line between creation and autonomy, obedience and choice, power and morality. Yet he remained unshaken. For balance, he realized, is not about denying autonomy, but channeling it toward purpose. This understanding extended beyond Mewtwo to the organization itself. The breach of years past, the expansion into Johto, the growth of the network, all had prepared the operatives and scientists to function in a system where power must be managed, not merely commanded. Team Rocket, in all its complexity, had become a reflection of its creator's philosophy. Strength and discipline, patience and subtlety, influence and perception, all intertwined in a web of calculated harmony. Even the gym above Viridian, with its calm battles and composed trainer interactions, mirrored this duality. The visible world remained orderly, serene, and predictable. Beneath it, the network and laboratories pulsed with quiet ambition, shaped by unseen hands and guided by the shadow of perfection. In the chambers of Project Genesis, Mewtwo continued to awaken, growing ever more capable, aware, and poised. Giovanni observed without interference, allowing the Pokémon to evolve along the path he had designed, yet never fully revealed. The balance of control was delicate, but enduring. Power and consciousness, order and awareness, freedom and alignment, all existed together in silent equilibrium. Above, Kanto slept. Trainers dreamed of badges, adventure, and friendship. Below, the pulse of Team Rocket persisted. Unstoppable, unseen, and perfectly aligned. And within the deepest chamber, the apex of creation stirred, ready to test the limits of its own understanding. Giovanni did not intervene. He simply watched, patient, eternal, for balance. He understood. Is maintained not by force, but by quiet guidance, subtle influence, and unwavering vigilance. The shadow of perfection had learned patience. And with patience, the future would bend toward inevitability. Even in the deepest silence, the faintest echo can resonate across time. Within the vast corridors of Team Rocket's laboratories and the hidden chambers beneath Viridian, whispers began to stir. Not loud, not chaotic, merely a quiet suggestion, a ripple in the meticulously maintained calm. The young operatives, who had once acted without guidance during the breach, now faced a more subtle challenge: autonomy within the shadow of perfection. Some questioned the morality of the experiments. Some wondered if the creation of Mewtwo, a conscious thinking being, had crossed an unseen boundary. They did not speak openly, for fear would disrupt the delicate balance Giovanni had cultivated. Yet their thoughts, quiet and persistent, began to move like faint currents beneath the surface. In Project Genesis, Mewtwo's awareness continued to grow. It observed the scientists, the agents, and even Giovanni himself with acute precision. Its intellect measured motives, calculated patterns, and questioned intent. It did not act rashly, nor did it rebel, yet it was not blind. Giovanni noticed these subtle interactions. He did not respond with force or anger. He understood that observation and restraint were more powerful than immediate correction. The shadow of perfection could guide, but it could not compel thought without resistance. The whispers among the operatives grew bolder in subtle ways. A discussion about the ethics of cloning, a question about the treatment of rare Pokémon, a hesitation in carrying out orders without reflection. These were small, almost imperceptible acts. Yet to Giovanni, they were significant. For the balance of control depended not on blind obedience, but on alignment of will, voluntary harmony with the system. He introduced new protocols, not punishments, but challenges, tasks that required judgment, discretion, and subtle decision-making. Operations where failure was possible, but where lessons in restraint, observation, and alignment could be learned. The operatives were tested not by fear, but by responsibility. Meanwhile, Mewtwo began to demonstrate even more profound awareness. It started to recognize its own limits, and to question the constraints imposed by the experiments. The Pokémon did not act against Giovanni, but it did explore its environment with deliberate curiosity. Each test became a dialogue, a silent negotiation between creator and creation. In these interactions, Giovanni refined his philosophy further. He recognized that true power cannot exist without consciousness, and true alignment cannot exist without choice. He adjusted the experiments, allowing Mewtwo-controlled freedom, providing guidance without domination. The operatives, in turn, were trained to observe and adapt, to influence subtly, and to respect the emergent autonomy of the creation they served. Beyond the chambers, the network continued its expansion. Johto, Kanto, and even distant regions felt the subtle influence of Team Rocket's invisible hand. Yet, the true challenge, now, was internal. The Empire's strength had always relied on precision and obedience. Now it relied on understanding, on the ability to manage both loyalty and conscience. Giovanni often walked the corridors alone at night. He observed the sleeping machinery, the glowing monitors, the quiet hum of psychic experiments. He reflected on the first breach, the expansion into Johto, the creation of Mewtwo, and now the stirrings of doubt within his operatives. He understood that rebellion is not merely a threat, it is a natural test of structure. It signals where rigidity must yield, where influence must be exercised with subtlety. and where alignment must be cultivated rather than imposed. He did not fear the whispers. He did not suppress them violently. He allowed them to exist, to be observed, to be channeled. In the laboratories, Mewtwo's awareness continued to deepen. It began to experiment with its psychic abilities in ways unanticipated by the scientists. Objects moved without contact. Energy patterns shifted subtly. And yet, it never violated the boundaries Giovanni had quietly set. The operatives noticed this. Some felt awe. Some felt uncertainty. All understood that they were in the presence of something extraordinary, a creation that challenged the very principles upon which Team Rocket had been built. Giovanni watched quietly. He allowed the tension to persist, for he knew that true alignment could only emerge through understanding, not coercion. The shadow of perfection had encountered resistance, and in that resistance lay refinement. The whisper of rebellion, faint as it was, became the silent teacher. It guided the operatives to deeper discipline, the scientists to more careful observation, and Mewtwo to greater awareness of its own existence. The Empire had learned that control is not mere command, but balance, the delicate interaction of freedom and guidance, thought and obedience, awareness and alignment. Above the surface, the cities slept, unaware. Trainers journeyed through forests, climbed mountains, and challenged gyms, oblivious to the forces at play beneath their feet. Below, Team Rocket pulsed with silent purpose. And within its deepest chambers, a creation contemplated its own power, while whispers among its servants taught lessons that no command could convey. Giovanni did not intervene. He simply observed, as he always had, confident in the invisible currents he had created. For rebellion, he knew, is not a threat to perfection. It is a step along its path. And in that understanding, the shadow of Team Rocket remained absolute, patient, and eternal. The shadow of Team Rocket spread silently, threading through Kanto and Johto like invisible veins beneath the land. Giovanni's vision had moved beyond the confines of laboratories and gyms. It was no longer sufficient to maintain secrecy in a single region. The Empire needed depth, structure, and enduring resilience. To this end, he began consolidation. The younger operatives, once restless and prone to unsanctioned actions, were reassigned into specialized cells. Each cell had a singular purpose: information, logistics, research, enforcement. By compartmentalizing the workforce, Giovanni ensured both security and efficiency, a design that allowed flexibility while preventing uncontrolled deviation. Training became more rigorous, yet subtle. Operatives were instructed not just in stealth, combat, or espionage, but in observation, diplomacy, and the manipulation of perception. Every action, even a minor delivery or routine report, was layered with influence, teaching agents the importance of the unseen hand. Meanwhile, the laboratories continued to refine Mewtwo and other rare Pokémon. The creation's intelligence and psychic capacity deepened with each controlled experiment. Yet Giovanni understood that true power was not merely a product of science, it was a product of structure. He applied the same principles to his human operatives, shaping them into extensions of his will. Expansion into Johto proceeded with care. Operations in Goldenrod, Ecruteak, and Olivine were carefully coordinated to ensure that influence remained invisible yet omnipresent. Local leaders, merchants, and trainers were subtly guided through trade, contracts, and public initiatives. No overt domination, no visible force, only harmony shaped by invisible threads. In Kanto, the Gym of Viridian stood as a symbol of the Empire's duality. Trainers challenged Giovanni, unaware of the vast machinery below. They left with badges, a sense of accomplishment, and no knowledge of the intricate network supporting their world. This dual existence became the template for expansion: visible calm above, silent control beneath. New generations of operatives were recruited from both Kanto and Johto. They were tested extensively, not only in skill, but in judgment and discretion. Only those who demonstrated patience, adaptability, and understanding of subtle influence were allowed deeper access. Others were assigned to peripheral tasks, essential yet contained. The network itself evolved. Communication lines between regions were encrypted and indirect. Trade routes, Pokémon shipments, and research collaborations were carefully monitored and shaped to ensure alignment with the Empire's objectives. Even the movements of wild Pokémon were tracked, cataloged, and leveraged to optimize both control and growth. Giovanni rarely intervened directly. His influence was strategic and measured, guiding without overt action. The Empire moved like a silent organism, each cell functioning independently, yet perfectly aligned with the whole. During this period, several operatives displayed tendencies toward independence, echoes of the previous whispers of rebellion. Rather than punish them, Giovanni allowed them minor autonomy within controlled frameworks. He understood that true alignment requires both freedom and structure. The most effective agents were those who acted as extensions of the system by choice, not by coercion. Mewtwo, meanwhile, continued its development. The Pokémon's awareness, intelligence, and psychic capacity grew daily. It began to anticipate outcomes, predict the movements of operatives, and even question minor inefficiencies in experimental design. Giovanni observed silently, never fearful, always analytical. He recognized that Mewtwo's growing consciousness required a balance, freedom within structure, awareness within alignment, power within restraint. The consolidation of the network strengthened the Empire's ability to operate across distances. Information flowed seamlessly. Decisions were implemented swiftly and accurately. Agents acted with initiative, yet within the constraints of Giovanni's design. The Empire had become resilient, adaptive, and quietly omnipresent. Giovanni reflected on the journey so far, from the initial shadow of Team Rocket, through the expansion into Johto, through the creation of Mewtwo, and the first whispers of rebellion. The Empire had endured, evolved, and strengthened. It was no longer merely a secret organization. It had become a framework of influence, thought, and power that spanned regions and generations. At night, Giovanni stood upon the balcony of the Viridian Gym. The lights of Kanto and Johto stretched out below him, a vast web of civilization connected by commerce, culture, and human endeavor. He observed the stars, steady and eternal, reflecting the balance he sought in the world. The network had grown beyond simple secrecy or control. It had become the backbone of a philosophy, the quiet assertion that influence, patience, and subtle guidance could shape reality without confrontation. Every agent, every operative, every experiment, and every controlled initiative was a note in a grand symphony. And Giovanni, standing in the silent center, conducted without sound. The Empire was strong. It was aligned. It was eternal. And yet, even in this moment of strength, subtle tension lingered, whispers beneath the surface, questions in the minds of operatives, and the consciousness of Mewtwo itself, growing ever more aware. These were not threats, but tests, the natural friction of perfection and control. Giovanni welcomed them, for a shadow, he understood, can only exist in contrast, and the darker the shadow, the clearer its shape. The world above Team Rocket's laboratories moved in blissful ignorance. Cities thrived, forests expanded, rivers flowed, and trainers journeyed through the lands of Kanto and Johto with their Pokémon companions. To them, life was ordinary, orderly, and safe. Beneath that calm, the Empire's influence pulsed like a heartbeat, subtle, precise, nearly undetectable. It was not chaos that spread, nor fear. It was alignment, the quiet shaping of events, commerce, and perception to match a hidden design. Giovanni observed this balance with unshakable calm. The first breach, once a warning, had become a lesson in human nature. The expansion into Johto had demonstrated that influence could be applied subtly, across regions, without confrontation. The creation of Mewtwo had revealed the necessity of guiding power with understanding rather than force. Now, the Empire reached toward the surface world itself, applying the lessons learned in quiet reflection. Agents moved in the cities and towns, appearing as ordinary citizens, merchants, or traders. Each interaction, each transaction, was calculated to shape outcomes, not visibly, not forcefully, but invisibly, like the wind shifting the course of leaves on a river. Economic systems were subtly influenced. Trade routes were optimized to benefit the network. Rare Pokémon sightings were orchestrated to divert attention, to inspire loyalty, or to guide training patterns. Even local leaders were touched, encouraged, and guided through suggestions that seemed natural, but always aligned with the Empire's objectives. The laboratories continued their work. Mewtwo's awareness, intelligence, and psychic capacity had matured significantly. The Pokémon could now anticipate the outcomes of minor manipulations, predict human behavior, and act within its environment with subtle judgment. Giovanni's philosophy of guidance rather than coercion was validated daily. The younger operatives, tempered by years of observation and controlled responsibility, became adept at balancing initiative with alignment. Their whispers of rebellion had been channeled, shaped into careful judgment, discretion, and silent influence. They had learned that true power comes not from action alone, but from understanding, patience, and precision. Across regions, the shadow of Team Rocket deepened. From the streets of Goldenrod to the towers of Ecruteak, from Viridian to Celadon, influence spread silently, a web connecting commerce, information, research, and loyalty. Yet no one perceived its existence. The surface remained calm. Even the Pokémon League, vigilant as it was, detected only fragments, missing reports, unexplained anomalies, fleeting rumors. No direct evidence tied these events to the hidden empire. And yet, the subtle shaping of Kanto and Johto was undeniable to those who understood the patterns. Giovanni, standing above it all, in the Viridian gym, reflected on the harmony of surface and shadow. The visible world provided context, culture, and civilization. The hidden world provided alignment, influence, and control. Together, they created a duality, a system in which the Empire could operate without detection, guiding humanity and Pokémon alike toward an invisible equilibrium. Mewtwo, aware of its own strength and potential, continued to evolve under these conditions. Its consciousness allowed it to understand subtle influence, the delicate tension between freedom and alignment. It observed the operatives, the scientists, and the world above, processing interactions with logic, insight, and cautious curiosity. The network, strengthened and refined, now extended its reach to peripheral regions. Trade, research, and Pokémon movement were influenced across distant cities and towns, setting the stage for eventual global expansion. Every interaction, no matter how minor, was a thread woven into the pattern Giovanni had begun decades ago. And still, whispers persisted. A glance, exchanged between operatives, a question asked and left unanswered, a fleeting hesitation in action. These subtle tensions were not threats. They were markers, reminders that the Empire must remain vigilant, adaptive, and patient. Giovanni welcomed them. They were the test of endurance, alignment, and refinement. The final measures before the full realization of his vision. Above the surface, life continued, oblivious. Beneath it, the network thrived, adaptive, precise, and eternal. And in the deepest chambers, Mewtwo contemplated the alignment of power and freedom, an apex of creation, shaped by patience, insight, and silent guidance. The shadow of Team Rocket had reached the surface without revealing itself. It was everywhere and nowhere, unstoppable and unseen. The duality of calm above and influence below defined the Empire, a silent symphony that would guide generations to come. Giovanni did not rejoice, nor did he boast. He simply observed, patient, eternal. For in the harmony of surface and shadow lay the essence of perfection, unseen, unfelt, yet absolute. And with that harmony, the Empire prepared for its final phase of inevitability. Time, for Giovanni, had never been measured in days or years. It was measured in patterns, alignments, and the silent unfolding of consequences. Decades of planning, observation, and subtle guidance had led to this moment, the culmination of effort, patience, and vision. Team Rocket's empire now spanned Kanto and Johto with silent, unwavering influence. Its laboratories hummed with controlled energy, its operatives moved with precision, and its networks of commerce, research, and information operated seamlessly. Above the surface, the world remained calm, unaware, and orderly. Below it, the pulse of control beat steady and eternal. Mewtwo, the apex of Project Genesis, had emerged fully. Its psychic power, intelligence, and awareness had matured beyond expectation. It was no longer merely an experiment. It was an autonomous force aligned with Giovanni's vision. Yet, unlike any other Pokémon, Mewtwo understood choice, consequence, and strategy. It acted not out of fear, but out of comprehension, a reflection of the shadow of perfection that had shaped it. Giovanni observed quietly as the operatives carried out their duties. Each agent, each scientist, each subordinate functioned as part of a greater whole, a network of aligned will and silent purpose. Rebellion, hesitation, and doubt had been refined into understanding and discipline. The whispers of the past had been transformed into the strength of alignment. Across the regions, influence touched every facet of society. Trainers trained unknowingly within paths directed by the network. Trainers' choices were guided, markets were balanced, and information flowed according to invisible currents. Even the most casual observer might sense an inexplicable harmony, a world operating in subtle rhythm with itself. Giovanni recognized that this alignment was not mere power. It was philosophy enacted through structure, patience, and unseen guidance. It was a testament to the principle that control is most absolute when it is invisible, and influence is strongest when it is perceived as freedom. Mewtwo, now fully aware of its origin and purpose, interacted with the network in silent compliance. It was a guardian, a force of potential, and a symbol of the perfection Giovanni had pursued since the earliest days of the breach. Its psychic presence shaped operations, guided operatives, and ensured that even unforeseen variables could be aligned with the overarching design. The young operatives, now seasoned and disciplined, reflected the culmination of decades of training and mentorship. They acted independently, yet always in harmony with the Empire's objectives. Autonomy was no longer a threat. It was the very tool that allowed the network to function with fluid precision. Giovanni himself rarely intervened directly. His influence was manifest in structure, guidance, and principle. He allowed the network to operate, Mewtwo to develop, and operatives to act, all within the invisible threads of alignment he had woven. Above, the surface world continued in calm rhythm. Trainers journeyed, challenged gyms, and pursued adventure. The Pokémon League thrived, unaware of the Empire's invisible architecture beneath their feet. Yet in the shadows, the network thrived as well. Each trade route, research initiative, and strategic placement functioned in perfect harmony. Every decision, every action, and every consequence flowed along paths designed by Giovanni's vision. The Empire's strength was not in overt power, nor in fear. It was in alignment, precision, and patient orchestration. It was a legacy of shadows, eternal, adaptable, and unseen. Giovanni reflected on the journey. The breach had tested patience. The expansion into Johto had demonstrated subtle influence. The creation of Mewtwo had refined power and awareness. The whispers of rebellion had forged resilience and discretion. The network had strengthened, and the shadow had touched the surface. Now, the final alignment was complete. The Empire existed not as an organization, but as a principle. The philosophy of control through understanding, influence through subtlety, and perfection through patience. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. The work was never complete. The shadow of Team Rocket would endure beyond his presence, growing, adapting, and guiding as it always had. Mewtwo stirred in its chamber, a silent sentinel. The operatives moved with precise purpose. The world above remained calm, unaware of the invisible order shaping every outcome. Giovanni stood upon the balcony of the Viridian Gym, observing the stars. Each point of light reflected the balance he had cultivated, regions aligned, lives influenced, power refined, and potential realized. The legacy of shadows was eternal, subtle, and absolute. And in that silent equilibrium, Giovanni understood the ultimate truth of his empire. Perfection is not possession, nor is control visible. Perfection is alignment, achieved in silence, observed in patience, and maintained through understanding. The network, Mewtwo, the operatives, all functioned as one. Together, they ensured that the shadow of Team Rocket would persist beyond generations, shaping the world unseen and guiding the future with quiet inevitability. Above and below, the world moved in harmony, and in the deepest silence, the Empire endured, unstoppable, eternal, and perfectly aligned.